Well, hello students, already halfway through the class, and this week we are going to talk about power. We're going to spend the whole week on power because power is so important when it comes to leadership. How do we use power in the right way as leaders? Depending on where we are on the organizational grid, as we move up, we have more power, but with that power comes responsibility. Are we going to be servant leaders? Or are we going to be leaders who are only interested in pursuing our careers and our goals, and only using our subordinates as catalysts to get us where we want to be, or in the servant leader mode, getting your team to where it needs to be? In other words, building a legacy so they can continue your legacy. Now, in this particular chapter on power, the chapter presents power as a tool that leaders need to use to influence their subordinates. Now, that's the definition of power. But what leaders have to realize is that there are consequences to power, either good or bad. The traditional sources of individual power are going to be discussed in this chapter, along with power sources that depend on the organizational structure and the sources of power, how influential they are as you move up in the organization. We're going to also talk about the elements of power as they relate to teams. That's so important. Are you a transformational or a charismatic leader? Do you work with your team? Do your subordinates report to you? Or do you report to your subordinates? It's something to think of. Now, here again, we're talking about leadership, but we're not looking at power in the traditional mode or using the formal organizational grid. There are consequences to team leadership as well when it comes to power. The causes, consequences, and solutions to power, corruption, and abuse are also discussed in this chapter. You're going to see some pretty neat videos that I put up that will tell you some of the good things that happen when you have the right type of power over your team, and some of the bad things. And certainly we can learn from a lot of the bad things because it teaches you not what to do. We want to focus more in this chapter, give more information on what we refer to as empowerment. And empowerment is discussed as a new approach to a leader's power. Now, remember, in management, we talk about delegating. This is different. This isn't about delegating. This is about empowerment. And empowerment isn't a rah-rah pep talk to say, okay, you go out, you do the job because I have confidence in you. And I'm going to give you some of my power while I go away and do other things that are more appropriate to my agenda. That's not what we're talking about here. So, this particular chapter, is going to have a strong cross-cultural flavor. That's right. When you look at power, you look at diversity, cross-cultural aspects of how you're communicating to your team and how they're communicating back to you. Because the perception of power is very different in different types of cultures. So the objectives in this particular chapter are going to be to define power, its consequences, and its cultural roots. If you are to look at figures 5.1 and 5.2, that will explain the leadership challenge. How much is enough? How much power is enough? When do you know you need more or need less? So we're also going to learn about the differences or the different sources of individual and team power in order to achieve goals. We're going to look at where power abuse and corruption come from, and destructive leadership, and how to prevent that from happening. What do we have in place that we can use that allows us to use power in the right way, that it's not abusive? So we also, in this chapter, we want to analyze the changes in use of power and the development of empowerment. Remember earlier I said there's a difference between delegation and empowerment. This is one of the things we're going to talk about. And know that every decision you make as a leader has consequences. Sooner or later, you have to be accountable to those decisions that you make. So that's what we're going to spend this week on. And I want you to get a heads up and really think about some of the things that I just mentioned on the overview.